Hello everyone, my name is Ramba Mamba, and in this episode, we are going to make our project be able to damage our enemies when we shoot at them. So I'm going to start by opening up our FPS project that we've been working on. Okay, so Unity has loaded up, and what we're pretty much going to do is we're going to make an enemy to actually shoot at. So I'm going to right click in our hierarchy, create an empty game object, reset the position to 0, 0, and 0, and also name it enemy. I'll also right click on it and create a 3D object and then a capsule, and this will be the graphics. Pretty much the same way as we did as a player, and we'll replace it later, of course. Also move it out so it's like a little bit offsetted from a player. And I'll also color it green or some different color. So going into our projects tab, into our assets, I'm going to make a new folder by right clicking, create folder, and I'll rename this materials. So basically how you color something is by applying a material to it with different color. So I'm going to make a create by right clicking, and I'm going to create a new material, and I'll call this enemy. And I'll also change the color of it by clicking on the albedo. And I'll change the enemy to red and press the X. So now we have our red material, and I can simply click on it and drag it onto my enemy or whatever I want it to drag onto. So there you go. Now our enemy is red, and we can clearly tell what it is. Perfect. So now let's add a script to an enemy to manage the health of our enemy. So add component, new script, and it will be called enemy. And I'm going to double click on it to open it up in Visual Studios. Okay, so Visual Studios has loaded up. And remember, we're going to need to make a couple of variables to manage the health that this enemy has. So I'm going to make a public float variable that will hold our health. And I'm going to set it to a default of 50F. And so remember, a float is basically a number that has a decimal or can be put into 0.01, some numbers like that. An integer is a number like 1, 2, 3. And a double is a number like 0.00111. It's a really long decimal, pretty much. And the reason I put F right after 50 is to specify that it's a float value. We're not going to be needing the void update or the void start because we do not want anything to happen automatically. We want this to happen when we actually shoot our enemy. So I'm going to make a new function, which is, and remember, a function is basically like void update or void start, called public void take damage. And at one time I told you guys about parameters in a function. Basically, right now I'm going to be taking in a parameter called float damage. And so a parameter is something that kind of affects the code. So for example, if I was to call this function, meaning if I wanted to run this function, I would have to say take damage. I would have to say take damage, and then inside of these two brackets, I would have to specify what float damage is. So instead of putting float damage, I could pass through a value of 10. So this would basically say, do the function void take damage and set the value of damage to 10. So this will be important because different guns will have different damage. So when we call this function, when we want to run this function, we can tell it how much damage the gun that we're using that hit it, how much damage it does, and then it'll damage the opponent accordingly. Then we can do health minus equals the amount of damage we did. So this is actually a shorthand term. This is the same as health is equal to health minus damage. It is just a quick way of writing that with the minus equals. So I'll remove that. And Now, so basically we're subtracting the health. We're subtracting damage from our health. Now we just need to check if we have less than 0 health. So if health is less than equal to 0f, then we can tell it to die, and for now we just want to destroy the game object. So we destroy ourselves right here with this. And another important thing to notice is that when you want to destroy a game object, you have to specify what game object. But there's two ways of writing game object, with a capital G and with a lowercase g. Game o- with the wait. So both are very similar, but it's important to note that with a capital G, you need to specify what game object you're talking about. And if you put with the lowercase g, it automatically knows that you're talking about the current game object that the script is attached to. So, for example, because I'm putting a lowercase g, it knows that what game object to destroy is the game object that has the script on, which is the enemy. So it's destroying itself. So lowercase g for itself, uppercase G for something you specify. Just keep that in mind. So now we can save this, and yeah. So I'm gonna drag our enemy script into our scripts folder, and then I'm gonna double click on it and open up our weapon script in Visual Studios. So we need to specify how much damage this weapon will do. So I'm gonna make another variable called public float damage, and I'm gonna set it to something like 10. Now, what we want to do is that we want to edit our void shoot function, void fire function. So if clip ammo is greater than 0 and can shoot, after we play the shooting animation and remove 1 from our clip ammo, we need to actually damage our opponent. So the way we can do this is we can use an invisible laser that shoots out from the center of our player screen, right where the crosshair is. So if you notice, we have a crosshair that we made, which is just a big dot right in the center of our screen. And we can shoot an invisible laser that goes through this dot, right? Parallel to the dot, goes through the dot. And whatever it hits will be what we want to damage. Because we want to shoot through our crosshair, right? So in our script, the way we can make this invisible laser is we can use a Raycast, right? So first I'm going to make a Raycast hit, which will store the what object that we hit, okay? And then I'm going to check if we hit anything with the Raycast. So if physics dot Raycast, and now we need to pass in a couple of parameters such as from where we want to shoot, what direction, where we want to store the information of what it hit, and what the range is. So we want to shoot from the center of our screen, which is the center of our camera. So first we need to make a reference to our camera. So I'm going to make a public transform cams. And now at the bottom, under physics.raycast, I can do cams.position, comma, cams.forward, oh, I spelled it wrong, cams.forward. Now we need to specify where it'll store the information. So out hit, which is this variable that we made up above. And then now we need to specify the range. So 1000f. We want it to go on pretty much infinity. So if we hit something within these parameters, then we want to damage whatever we hit, and we can figure out what we hit using this variable that we made. So, and one thing that we know is that all of our enemies have a script called enemy on them. So we can make a reference to this script by doing enemy is equal to hit transform dot get component enemy. So this might seem really confusing and really scary, but this enemy variable is the script that we made on all of our enemies. We added this to our enemy right here. We take that component, we name it with a lowercase e, and we set it to whatever we took out from whatever we hit, and we get the component of the script. So now once we have the script, we basically can just tell it to take damage. In our function enemy, in our script enemy, we have a function that is called take damage. So all we need to do is we need to call this function called take damage, and we need to pass through a variable or amount of damage. So if I go back into our weapon script, first I can check if this script is even there or not. So if enemy is not equal to null, with a lowercase e, then we want to take damage and we want to tell it how much damage to do. So enemy dot take damage lowercase e, my bad, enemy dot take damage. And remember how we made that little we made something within the two parentheses. We made a little parameter, float damage. So when we're calling this function now in weapon, we need to tell it how much damage our pistol will do. And remember we made a little we made a variable up at top called public float damage and set it to 10. So now we do enemy.take damage 10 pretty much. So now if I save this, head into Unity, wait for it to compile, click on our enemy. It says the health is 50, and if I click on my player, if I go to the gun, it says cams, non-transform, and damage 10. So for the camera, I'm just going to drag our camera into this slot. And now if we hit play, it should be shooting Raycast right where that dot in the center of the screen is. And so if I aim at my enemy and shoot 5 times, if I click on my enemy, so there's a couple of problems that we're having right now. On our player is able to walk through any other objects in the scene, because when we use transform.translate, we're pretty much telling the computer just force override wherever you're moving. So instead of while using transform.translate, I clicked on our player and I added a component, added a rigid body. And so rigid body is kind of like it controls all the physics. And then I went down into constraints, opened it up, and froze the rotation on X, Y, and Z so that it doesn't topple over. It stands up straight. And one more problem I think that we should fix is that our enemy script and our enemy name is the exact same. So I'm actually going to rename it to opponent. I'm going to rename our game object to opponent. So actually when we are shooting a raycast, it will only hit the graphics component because our graphics component has a capsule collider, and when you shoot a raycast it only collides with something that has a collider, and our parent object doesn't have any colliders. So we were trying to access the top level component named opponent instead of our graphics. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to drag our graphics component out. I'm going to delete opponent, rename graphics to opponent, and also add back our script by adding component, add enemy, and save that. So now if we hit play, when I shoot at my enemy 5 times, it disappears. That means it worked. Perfect. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.